While we will get into the crazy things that happened in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, we still got to focus on the Pittsburgh Steelers here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. And doing that today, we're going to look at the cornerback room, not just give our grades on the season, but what I think that their plan needs to be moving forward to build the cornerback room of the future. I'm Chris Carter, your host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Happy Monday, everyone. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than your PrizePicks projection, then you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On at PrizePicks.com. Now, let's get into what I want to talk about. We'll talk about the divisional round games in a minute here because they were pretty interesting. But I think there's things that we can glean from what the Steelers did this year and from some of the things that we saw over the weekend with some of the teams that won. It's clear the Steelers, while we are going to emphasize a lot on this show, they need to get stronger in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, all of that needs to be a concern. But I do think that they need to make sure that this cornerback room is nice and tidy next year. The Steelers made a concerted effort to get all veterans for their cornerback room going into this last season, with Ahkello Witherspoon keeping him around, going and grabbing Levi Wallace, making sure Cam Sutton was still under contract. They kept James Pierre around. They had a bunch of guys who they knew were vets, could kind of play on each other. You also had Maulet in the mix. That was fine. But we all knew at some point superstar wide receivers could eat up this defense if they're left in single coverage against some of these guys, because none of these guys were premier shutdown corners in the NFL. And that's not to their fault. It's just truth. There's not too many of those guys around. And it came back to bite the Steelers in some of the games where they were getting their tops ripped off by some of the best receivers of the NFL, like A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase at times. Those things, even though they didn't lose the game where they were getting scored on by Jamar Chase, you get my point. But I think that there is a clear path to what the Steelers need to do for the cornerback room, because it's not so simply just draft a guy and that's that. Cam Sutton is a free agent, and that's going to be a big question this year, because Cam Sutton, I think people might be underestimating his value, what value he might bring in free agency. This is a guy who is 28 years old. He finished this past year with the most passes defensed on the Steelers roster with 15. He also had 3 interceptions. This is also a guy now with 6 years of experience in the NFL. 28 is the prime age that you want a cornerback to come in. He's versatile. He can play slot corner, both outside corner positions. He can back off and help in safety sort of roles. And I think what many Steelers fans might not see behind the scenes, but he's a leader. And as a person who's covered Cam Sutton, he was one of the first guys that I kind of got used to regularly talking to back in when he was a rookie in 2017. And that was like my first full year of being in the Steelers locker room after games and everything. You could always go to Cam Sutton and ask him a football question, and he would give you a detailed answer. And even to this day, people know when you ask Cam Sutton a question, you are going to get an answer, and it's going to be thought out. He's going to pour a lot into it, and that's who he is. And that's who he is, not just when he talks to the press, but also when he talks to his teammates. That's a guy who puts a lot of thought in everything. When Joe Hayden was around, Joe Hayden was the leader, and he listened to Joe Hayden. They were good teammates. Now he's kind of taken on that role of being the head guy in the cornerback room and setting the tone. And I think he sets a very good tone for what the Steelers want and need. I think he's physical. He is dedicated. And I think that he's the kind of guy that you want your better cornerbacks to sort of idolize, even if they're more talented than Cam Sutton, by being faster, taller, with better ball skills, whatever they have, you want them to kind of model that. I do think the Steelers shouldn't shy away from a cornerback in this class. I think if they end up, I'm always about best player available, but I don't think the Steelers would be in a bad situation if Christian Gonzalez falls down to them at 17, or Joey Porter Jr. As a lot of Steelers fans want to talk about Joey Porter Jr. because obviously his dad is peasy. But other guys like Cam Smith and Kelly Ringo from South Carolina and Georgia. But at the same time, I also think that if they can get one at 32 while still getting another position, I still think it's worth the shot. And I know some people out there say, Chris, what are you saying? They're drafting a cornerback early. Those never go well. But I also think this is a really good class to take that shot, especially with one of these first two picks. It just depends on how things roll out. If cornerbacks aren't at a premium in the top 10 picks and they start slipping down, I think that there's a good chance that you could get a really good one at 17. If they go on a run early, maybe, okay, yeah, stick to the plan, get a guy on the defensive line, offensive line, one of those type of guys, and then see who rolls around at 32. But, I'd be very intrigued. There's at least 5 cornerbacks who I personally so far have reviewed at least a good bit of their tape and feel really confident about. Like I said, Christian Gonzalez from Oregon, I think he's going to go before the Steelers pick. Joey Porter Jr., I'm honestly not sure where he'll go. Again, we got to see combines on all these guys. Cam Smith, Kelly Ringo, but I also like Devin Witherspoon of Illinois. It's going to be interesting to see where those guys play out. But you look at those 5 guys, and there's still other guys to really like in this class. Emmanuel Forbes, I think, is another one out of Mississippi State. But if they're able to get a guy there, you don't want to have a guy have to be the guy immediately. I think you want that guy to come into a cornerback room that's kind of led by some savvy vets. And I think they have those guys on the roster right now with Levi Wallace, Ahkello, Witherspoon, and technically William Jackson III's there. But I think Cam Sutton is the guy you want leading that group. And if you can bring him back, you can make it happen. And I'm talking about bringing back Cam Sutton. You're probably going to, if you can keep him before he gets to the open market and you get a deal done, I think that would be wise, because I think he could go for a good bit of money. And I know some people were thinking, well, can they afford to pay him? Well, yes, because here's the thing. Some of those other veterans I mentioned, William Jackson III, he's scheduled to make $12.1 million from the Steelers this year. He's never going to see that money. They're either going to chop that down by a whole lot or cut him, and all that money will either most of or all of that money will go back into the salary cap. I also kind of expect them to make a decision between Levi Wallace and or Ahkello Witherspoon. We'll get into my grades on what I think they'll decide there, but you can free up $4 million by letting go either one. So say William Jackson III and in one of those 2 cornerbacks are let go, that's $16 million you've freed up, and then you could get to Cam Sutton, and then you can also draft your young cornerback, and then all of a sudden you have Cam Sutton, one of the 2 cornerbacks that you kept, probably James Pierre and a rookie, and then you could probably keep around an Arthur Maulet or another guy that you find at free agency for not too expensive money. And then you're working, and then you're saying, hey, wait a second, this could be a competitive cornerback room. I think that needs to be part of this plan the Steelers have moving forward. There's a lot of moving pieces that Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, and this Steelers front office have to nail down. But if they do this with the cornerback room, I think they put themselves in a really good position. We're going to have a lot of time to talk about all the cornerback prospects that'll be on the talking, on all everyone's big boards. We're going to do mock draft Monday after the Super Bowl. So stop asking about it. A lot of y'all guys are asking about it all the time. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys are excited. But I always save mock draft Monday for after when the Super Bowl is played. Then we start getting into things. So that being said, I think that's what they need to do with the cornerback room. We'll get into all the prospects that they could draft and the ups and the downs of each one as prospects coming into the NFL in a bit. But I want to go specifically over my grades for everyone in that cornerback room this past year, because I think you'll get more insight into why I'm feeling that. We'll do that in a minute. And then, of course, you'll get my reaction to all the divisional round playoff games that happened this weekend. We'll do that all right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about PrizePicks. PrizePicks, of course, is daily fantasy made easy. Why play different fantasy sports games that are daily when you can just, whether they're going to make you pick an entire roster of players and compete against thousands of people, when you can go to PrizePicks right away, pick 2 to 5 players, and then all you have to do is just beat PrizePicks. PrizePicks is going to give you a number, a projection. All you have to do is say that player is going to get more or less than that projection. If you're right, you win money, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any bet when you're playing PrizePicks. And you're not competing against others. It's just PrizePicks. And they don't just do it for the NFL. They also do NBA, NHL, college sports, so much more. So go get PrizePicks right now. You can download PrizePicks in your mobile, on your mobile phone, on your app, or any of your stores, or you can go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports right now. And first time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On. Make sure you go check out prizepicks.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. We're keeping it rolling here. Let's get into our cornerback grades for the season. Now, as we've been rolling these out, I think this is our third group that I've graded. I think I've now done the offensive line, the tight ends, and now the cornerbacks. So we're spreading it out. We're going to try to make this, an even spread thing here. Reminder, all season long, if you were following us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, with each game, we gave one of these grades: 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, or 1 skull, 2 skull, 3 skull, stars being better for good things, skulls being worse for bad things. And you got a grade for each game that you played. If you didn't receive a grade in a game, it just meant, you were kind of okay, neutral, and nothing really counted against you. So let's get into some of our grades here. And let's lead off with the guy that I think that we're talking about. And I'll explain more of why I think Cameron Sutton is that guy. And I gave him 14 stars on the year and only 3 skulls. That totals up to being basically 11 stars over his skulls all season long. I gave that a B+ on the year. I think Cameron Sutton answered a lot of calls to be kind of stand up in the right moments this year. You go back to how he played in some of his games, and you can find really big moments, him stepping up and fighting through. And there were times that he had a letdown here and there. But I mean, the interception he got against the Bengals in week 1. He had an interception that got the Steelers back in the game against the Jets, even though they didn't win that game. And he did drop a pick there. He had an amazing interception. And I thought the best interception that we've seen from a Steelers cornerback in a while against the Raiders over the middle against Derek Carr. And the thing was also with the 15 passes defense that he registered on the season, he continued to kind of show up. And when I was looking back at my grades, I only had 3 games where I gave him a bad grade. And each time he only received a 1 skull grade. So it wasn't like he was ever getting toasted a lot. It was just like, he lost out in this moment. You needed him to stand up in that moment, that he could have done better here. But by and large, he received a lot of 1-star grades, and then he had a 2-star grade against the Bengals, a 3-star grade against the Raiders, and just kind of was steady and consistent all season. That's who Cam Sutton is, and that's why I think the Steelers should want him as a leader for the long haul moving forward, at least for the next 3 years or so. Because here's the thing: is that, again, if you draft that cornerback of the future, even if he's not good enough to start right now, you'd have Cam Sutton and Levi Wallace on the outside. You could still rock with someone on the inside there, and that rookie can learn behind them and learn behind Cam Sutton, who again was a very detailed player. He made his hay in the NFL. He didn't have the fastest 40. He's not 6'3". He finds ways to win, and he studies the game relentlessly. I think that he'd be a great person for them to study. Now, moving on, I'll get this grade out of the way real quick because this was kind of just a 1 game. Josh Jackson did a really solid job filling in for basically a little bit for the Steelers in the middle part of the season when they were hurt up in their cornerback room. He got a 1 star for his performance. I believe it was against the Buccaneers when they were just down so many guys against Tom Brady. Stepped up. You only get a C because you got 1 star, but kudos to him for being ready for the moment. So there's that. We'll also move along right here to Arthur Maulet. Now, Arthur Maulet, I think, is a very specific type of cornerback, and he's a slot cornerback that is a lot like Mike Hilton, but not as, I think, instinctive or talent as he's not as good as Mike Hilton, obviously. But when he plays downhill, he's just fine. He's right where you want him. He's being aggressive. He's stuffing the run. He's rushing the quarterback, and he can make plays around the box. And he showed that with his 6 stars on the season. I thought he had some really good moments for them. But at the same time, there were just too many times where the Steelers were just getting toasted over the middle, and oftentimes he was the guy around the ball. I thought he had his worst game of the year against the Bengals in the second time around. The first time around, I thought he did really well against them and was very much part of the scheme. The one thing I'll say about Arthur Maulet and why I think the Steelers should consider bringing him back for cheap if they can't find another answer in this lot is that when you look at Arthur Maulet, that guy sticks to the game plan. He's an energy guy. He's a guy that you like having in your locker room. He's not a superstar player, and he's not going to win you all the matchups. But if you can't find a better slot corner, I think he's one of those guys that you keep around for not paying too much, and you let him kind of be that guy that helps kind of keep up the good parts of the culture. He didn't like losing, and he often would kind of just be a person that wanted to step up in the moment to make sure that the Steelers didn't lose. I thought that he certainly brought that. That's why I gave him a C- on the year. Just he had more skulls than stars, but still brought something to the room. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. Well, actually, first, I'll go over James Pierre. James Pierre, this is a shout out to Tony Serino because James Pierre is his guy. James Pierre got 6 stars when I look back on the season and only 1 skull grade. That's good enough for a B- when you look at the 5 stars over 4 or 5 more stars than skulls. Really good performance from him when he was coming. He's still a fill-in guy, but I think James Pierre embodies, a lot of what the Steelers are right now, and that's overachieving on some things and showing up and fighting hard for good results. James Pierre doesn't ask for anything, and he just comes and he works, and you want that from a guy, but you also want really talented guys who do the same thing. I think James Pierre is another guy that you keep around, you find a way to pay, and you say, hey, you're part of the fold. You'll help on special teams. You'll be one of our first guys off the bench in the corner for the cornerbacks. But I think that when you're going to be a team that's going to be based on playing really strong defense, you're going to need someone who you can rely on as a starter more than James Pierre. So I think that you keep James Pierre around as a depth player, but you don't necessarily commit to him. Like the Steelers should not go into next season thinking that guy is going to be starting on the outside unless someone gets hurt or something drastic happens that puts them into a desperate spot. Now, as I was alluding to earlier, this is where it gets kind of interesting because we go to the 2 vets that have been brought in over the last 2 years. Of course, Ahkello Witherspoon, the Steelers traded for him last year. I'll start with him. I gave him a C- on the year. He almost fell into the D category, but when I looked back, the only time that he had about 3 bad games. I thought he got toasted for a bad play against the Patriots, didn't look good against the Browns in the first one, and then got destroyed in the Eagles game, and that was the last time that we saw him because of injury. But he was solid in the other games against the Bengals the first time around. I thought he was he did a really good job. This is the picture that you're seeing here on his grade poster that's sort of made here. Is from an interception that he got against Joe Burrow in Week 1. I thought he was solid against the Jets. I thought he held himself up well in the other games that he played, other than the ones that I mentioned. But yeah, Ahkello Witherspoon. I think the biggest thing that worked against him was that the Steelers used a lot of man concepts this year, and he's very much a zone corner. And it was just when in that situation, he was not he was not able to play to his strengths, and it worked against him. And so I think this was why the Steelers gave him and Levi Wallace similar contracts, because they wanted to see who would better fit with the direction that they were headed. And when we look at the grade from Levi Wallace, he was clearly the answer here. Levi Wallace finished the year. I gave him 8 stars on the season, only 2 skulls. That's good enough for a B-. I mean, credit to Levi Wallace. He took advantage of the opportunities that the Steelers gave him. Really, there were only 2 games where I docked him for those skulls, and that was the Browns the first time and the Jets early in the season. But I gave him a star against the Bengals the first time, a star against the Bills because he intercepted Josh Allen and was really the only one. His big play was the one thing that kind of kept the Steelers in it for 5 minutes before that game got out of hand. I gave him 2 stars against the Saints because I thought he played phenomenally in that game. He had 3 straight games with stars against the Ravens in the loss, and then the Panthers win and the Raiders win, and then I gave him 2 stars against the Browns in the season finale. So I felt like he was the solid vet the Steelers were hoping to find, because I think they definitely see the writing on the wall that, hey, they know that they need to kind of find that future cornerback one who's going to be the shutdown, put him on an island. You don't got to worry about him. But Sutton, Wallace, Pierre, all these guys are puzzle pieces that can fit into a scheme that Terrell Austin can use. And I think that was all. This is also part of the plan with Terrell Austin at defensive coordinator. I know that the Steelers defense didn't look great at times this year, but they still finished in the top 10 in a year where they were missing TJ Watt for 2 months. That deserves credit. And I was wondering if having Terrell Austin as the defensive coordinator would lead to, the secondary getting a boost somehow. And they finished first in the NFL in interceptions. I actually don't know the last time that the Steelers did that. But by doing that with Terrell Austin, I think that he deserves credit for that group playing better. I just think that they need to make the right decision and keep a few of those vets, and then still make an early investment in this NFL draft, whether it's the first round pick or either of the second round picks, and make sure that one of those is a cornerback, unless they get some studs on both offensive, defensive line and a linebacker, or, another position somewhere. You never know how the draft plays out. But I do think that this is a really good cornerback class, and they could get one of those guys in those early rounds that could help change the tone of everything. And we could maybe even see some guys finish with some A grades next season. We'll see how that plays out. We'll get to some of the other groups in a bit here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're working our way through the position groups and the grades that I've assembled for them throughout the season. There will be some A's coming up because the Steelers definitely did have those guys. We'll break that down later. But we got to switch it up. I do want to talk about all the things that happened in the divisional round of the playoffs, because it was kind of wild at times. Some boring games, some not so boring games. But what did the results say about where I think the Steelers fit into the NFL? We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about one of our brand new sponsors, and one we're really excited to talk to you about. It's FanDuel, because the NFL playoffs are here. We're really excited to talk about our new sports betting partner at Locked On, because they're the #1 sports book in America, FanDuel. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. All that action on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, on your $5 bet. Again, that's putting $5 down to get $150 in free bets at FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter, your host here on a Monday. And now that we don't have to worry about Monday Night Football on a playoff game, I'm sorry, Monday night playoff games are dumb. They should be sticking to Saturday and Sunday games. But anyways, I digress. Let's dive into what we saw this weekend. Kudos to the Jaguars for kind of keeping up with the Chiefs, though you do wonder what's going to happen with the Chiefs, because Patrick Mahomes gets a high ankle sprain. He plays through it, and it was awesome to see that he fought through it and, got the victory for his team and everything, but still alarming that he had to play through it in that situation. And I am not so sure how well he heals up from that in a week's time, where they take on the Cincinnati Bengals, who destroyed the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. I honestly didn't think that was going to happen. I thought the Bengals could win. I thought if this was going to happen, it was going to go down to the wire. But man, the Bills looked like they never had a chance. And it was embarrassing to happen on their own field. Granted, sure, the Bills dealt with some tough injuries on their end, but so did the Bengals. And the Bengals deserve a lot of credit for what they're doing right now. Joe Burrow was sharp as he always was. The Bengals offensive line, despite having all those backups, pushed around the Bills. Joe Mixon, 20 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Just a really good showing from him. You also had Sam Perrine, who hurt the Steelers in that second Bengals matchup. He averaged 4.7 yards on the ground himself. Joe Burrow also scampered for 31 yards on 6 carries himself. And you just saw the Bengals kind of do what they wanted to do in this game. And I think that it's a rough sign for the Bills, who this was supposed to be their team of destiny. This was supposed to be their big year to make a push. And then you saw Stephon Diggs arguing with Josh Allen on the bench at the end of the game. More or less arguing, just more yelling at him, and Josh Allen kind of being in his own world, focusing or whatever. But it's been so many times now the Buffalo Bills have been that team in this very round, just coming up short for whatever reason, and to do it so just sadly by losing to the Bengals team. And it's not about the Bengals being bad, because they're a good team and they're very good. And heck, I'm picking them to win the AFC the rest of the way because of the way that Patrick Mahomes look. And also, I think that the Bengals, the way they're set up, the Bills were kind of the team that I thought were going to have to knock them off because of the way that the Bills played. And I thought that, with their defense, maybe they could get after them. I'm not so sure that Kansas City's going to be able to do that against the Bengals. And the Bengals have had Kansas City's number for 2 years now. I think it's 3 straight times that they've beaten Patrick Mahomes. Maybe it might be more if I'm forgetting one, but I think that the Bengals are looking really good right now. But here's the other thing about that. Also, before I say this, I'll just acknowledge the NFC existence. The Eagles kicked the snot out of the Giants. I feel stupid forever picking the Giants. And the Niners did what I thought they'd do. They choked the Cowboys out, and they proved to be the team that was better at winning with running the football and not letting their quarterback make a mistake. Dak Prescott made the mistakes, and it hurt them in the long run. Now, back to my point here about the Bengals. I think the Bengals. I know a lot of Steelers fans, wanted to see the Bills win and wanted to see the Bengals lose because of the rivalry and everything. But I also think that the Bengals winning and their continued success this year, you look at how the Steelers played them, I think it's a very good sign for the Steelers if they're able to go into next year and also compete with them again, which I think that they will, because you go back and you look at those games this year. The Steelers beat the Bengals in the opener. They only lost by 7 in the second game. And this is the best Bengals team that we've seen, I think, in my lifetime. They defend well. They've got Joe Burrow. They've got the receivers. They've got the running back. They've done a lot of the things right. And this was arguably one of the worst Steelers teams I think I've seen since 2003. And somehow they still found a way to claw their way to a winning record, because that's just what Mike Tomlin seems to do. But we all knew this was a rebuilding year. This was not a rebuilding year for the Bengals. They just won the Super Bowl, the conference. They got to the Super Bowl, and they're trying to win the Super Bowl now. But this was these are two teams on different trajectories or different parts of their trajectory, and the Steelers were able to hang with them. I think next year the Steelers have a lot of work to do. Again, they have a lot of moving pieces they need to knock down. But all the people that are saying the Steelers, they could never hang with any of those top of the teams, I want to remind you of the old saying, styles make fights. Just because the Steelers got blown out by the Bills earlier this year doesn't mean that they couldn't hang with the Bengals, because they did hang with the Bengals. And I think a prime example of that is how the Ravens looked when they played the Bengals just last week. They're a team with a backup quarterback, but they was just hanging in there. And if it wasn't for a crazy play that the Bengals made at the goal line, maybe the Ravens are the team that would have been playing this weekend. Who knows? But we do know this: the Bengals, they are playing very good football. The Steelers, they were able to hang with them both times this year, even come out on top early this year, when the Steelers, we saw later on, weren't playing good football themselves. So I say all that to say, I don't think that this is a theme that I said last week. I'm going to say it again this week. I don't think the Steelers are as far away from being actual AFC contenders as some people make them out to be. I hear, forget the next 10 years. They're just not going to have a chance. I don't think that's the case. I think this defense has a lot of components to it. They still need to get a linebacker. They need to lock down that cornerback plan, and I need to get another presence on the defensive line, whether it's Larry Ogunjobi or someone else to go with Cam Hayward, on that part. And they need to get, I think, some forces for the offensive line. But if Kenny Pickett and that offense starts to improve, TJ Watt can be healthy next year for the entire season, or at least, not miss 7 games. And you see that growth from those guys, I think that they're putting themselves in a position to bang with a lot of teams in the NFL, and especially the Bengals, if they're able to get after the quarterback. Because to me, that's the best way that I think that someone disrupts this team. I'll be very intrigued to see if the Chiefs get any pressure on Joe Burrow. But if the Bengals make it to the Super Bowl, I'd be really intrigued to see who between the Eagles and the Niners play them and how those defenses approach them, because I see the way that those two teams play football right now. Those are the ways that I see the Steelers trying to play football in the next 3, 4, 5 years or so, not taking that long to get there, but saying the trajectory the Steelers are on, it's to be like one of those two teams in the NFC sooner rather than later. So all that being said, I think it was still a fun weekend of football. It's always a fun weekend of football. Well, I take that back. There's some weekends that are just trash, but all that I'm just saying that to say I think that the Bengals are still a fun team to watch, and I think they're going to beat the Chiefs next week. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see who comes out of the NFC and how that team clashes with who I think will be the Bengals in the Super Bowl. But we got a long way to get there. Couple weeks ahead of that. Conference championships coming up next weekend. We'll be breaking more things down as we grow throughout the week. I'll keep having more grades for you right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks so much for checking us out here on YouTube. Remember, if you saw this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. You can also check us out on all of our podcasting platforms. Wherever you get podcasts, we're there. And if you want to help us out, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5-star with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a special shout out at the end of the show. Again, thanks for checking us out here. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics. I'll be back tomorrow with more right here for you on the Locked On Steelers podcast.